must be, boy, this camera is quiet this morning. We did this loading. Leslie, it's all yours.
Okay, let's start where we were just talking about what the neighborhood was like, what Detroit was like in the 20s. Do you want to start, Jerry?
Sure. I remember as a child that we had a very sort of integrated neighborhood. We had the Poles, we had the Lithuanians, we had Finnish, we had Scotch, we had Italian, and it just seemed like we were a family. I mean, as a child, I never felt any problems getting along with any of them. True, we lived at the time that I remember the most in Dearborn, and that was a segregated city. So we had no blacks to live with, that I had to experience any of that. I was too young when I lived in Detroit because we moved when I was 7 into Dearborn with my parents in 1926. And therefore, I just remember little parts about going to school in Detroit, and there we had an integrated classrooms. But by the time I was 7, we were out. And these were very hardworking people, because I remember our Polish neighbors had 10 children. They had 5 boys and 5 girls, and the middle set was twins, a boy and a girl. I'll never forget that. And the Lithuanians were just like my parents, not too many children. They had 2 girls. Mom had 2 children, a son and a daughter. And I remember the Depression times with these children, the 10 especially. When we went to their house, I shall never forget, as long as I live, that the mother prepared the food for the father. They had the biggest frying pan I've ever seen in my life. It was that big. She would make a piece of meat in that and make a lot of gravy. He would eat the meat. What he didn't eat, she would eat. And then all these kids on a small table, about just the size of the frying pan, had a chunk of bread in their hand, and they were all kneeling by this table, dipping into that gravy. And that's what they had to eat. Now, see, my parents were a different, I guess they were very, I would say, more involved in the days of people having equal rights, so that we never had that kind of a situation. I always felt these kids were, I don't know, subdued. The only time that they ate well, because they had a garden and they all had to work in the garden, was during the summer and the fall time, because they planted, they dug up their potatoes, their tomatoes, and they did then do the canning, and that's when they did have food to eat. But otherwise, during the times when there was out of season, I'll never forget that. That is something that'll stay with me all my life.
Anna, you were talking about how you had to speak so many different languages. Why don't you tell me all the different languages that you spoke back then?
What did she ask me?
Mom's hard of hearing. She asked about how many languages you had to speak. I think it was mostly Russian and Ukrainian.
Russian and Ukrainian, and Czechoslovakian, all Slavic language I could speak.
Is that because of the neighborhood you lived in?
Yes, I've been talking in the neighborhood. We have it for quite a bit. We've been organized, so if you're going out of the house and you live in your house, you only say, watch my house. And the neighborhood has got to watch each other house. We love together. The nationality didn't make any much difference to me. Only the nature of the people who work. Like she was talking about the Polish people, like the oldest boy named Joe, he used to say, "Oh, Mrs. Kruchen, I wish you would be my mother, because their mother was not educated at all, and they make, besides that, they make the whiskey. So they were kind of drunken. So that's why he wished, up to today, he understands me very well. He wished I was his mother. That is all I could tell you in the name. The rest Lithuanian, and didn't have no problem with him. They're all like one family, live in the whole block.
Stella,
That's all I could tell you.
are you you're from Detroit originally, or?
No, I was born in Europe, and my dad come here first, and then 6 months later, my mom and myself. So we moved in Bridgeton, New Jersey. From there, we moved to Violin, and my father died when I was 4, and my brother was about 6 months old. And my mother remarried a very good person. Of course, I asked my stepdad why he never adopted me. He said those days they didn't think of adoption, but you know, how to raise you. But he was a good person.
When did you move to Detroit?
When I was 5, my father got a job here. You know, at that time, they had a lot of the jobs were coming in. He worked in Kelsey Hayes, and he lost his fingers, 6 fingers, 3 here and 3 over here in the factory. At that time, they didn't have, if I could remember correctly, he was getting $7 a week while he was home from that accident. He didn't get, you know, he didn't get anything for the fingers at that time.
What kind of neighborhood did you live in?
Well, I lived in the same neighborhood on the west side, but then after I did move after I married. I lived on the east side. My marriage is interracial, and I lived there. That's how I know everybody on both sides. Well, you know, my mother always talked about how tough it was in Europe. You know, she used to tell me things, you know. That's why people from Europe were running to get better, but it wasn't just what they thought it would be, you know.
I'm just wondering if we want to pursue with Stella a little bit about organizing.
Yeah.
No, I'm still rolling.
Exactly. Let's talk a little bit about.
I didn't tell you my story all. I didn't tell you that when I come into this country. I come in 1912. I was 16 years old. I come into this country, and from there on, I've been going to always with the people. And that's the way how I live. My husband died 1954. I have my child born in New York, and then we come into Detroit when they Ford announced they're going to pay $5. So a lot of people from New York come in, those window cleaners, they come into the Detroit because they're going to get them not from the step ladder up. So that's what my story is, whole life, beginning. And I kept on working together with the people. To me, with no nationality, different. They're a human being. That's all. As long as they are alive and good, I enjoy them.
Stella was talking about her dad losing fingers on a job. my dad lost fingers on a job. And that was because they was working in a shop that was making purses, pocketbooks, and they make that clamping, that edge on there with a metal, and the punch press got his fingers cut off too. So when he came to Detroit from the story, I get, he couldn't get the job at Ford's for $5, but he did get a job working in a box factory. Of course, he was making nowhere near the money at that time that these men at Ford's were getting $5 a day. So I remember some of the, harder times that, like Mom, used to work for the railroad track, cleaning the cars, the passenger cars, people getting off, for their stations, and she would be going into work to clean them as they go get ready for the next departure.
Let's talk now of the,
Just ran out of film.
oh,
Yeah.
Winnicka.
Yeah,
Winnicka.
that's Stella's maiden name.
And my name was Buttrin.
Oh, yeah, but
Excuse me?
Yeah,
your dad's,
B-U-T,
your
yeah.
stepdad's
Excuse me.
name.
Okay,
No,
Sorry,
that's okay.
sorry.
We're gonna start again, okay?
Okay.
Okay, so let's talk about the unemployed councils, and I'll start with you, Stella. You wanna talk
Well-
about how they were organized, or tell me just a little bit.
Well, I'll tell you what happened when Ford started laying off people, and when they people at one time were losing their homes, they used to evict them. So we used to go in there. We used to go there and fight for the people to stay in their homes. If you remember, she could remember too that this Mitchell's, they had a home, and he lost his job in Ford's, and they tried to evict him, so they had a great big demonstration right by the house. I mean, the blocks were just full of people. And when they tried to, they got the police there, so that some of the men got shot, and they put them in a patrol wagon. They had patrol wagons, and they pushed them all in the patrol wagon to take them away. But they were such a fight. I was inside the house, and this was really funny. They were threatening us with tear gas and all that. So they had water, tubs of water laying around the house. So if they should get the bonds inside the house, that they would get that bonds out with the water.
What kinds of people were involved in the unemployed councils? Who went to those meetings?
Well, the ordinary people that were laid off from their jobs, I mean, there's many people there that didn't have anything to eat. I could tell you about one guy that I knew that hung himself because he was so hungry so many times until he lost his mind. And he was a very brilliant young man at the time, but he just couldn't survive on nothing. He just seemed like there was nothing to him. He just ate what somebody would offer, give him something, and he lost his mind, and he went to an empty house and hung himself.
Can you remember how the meetings what you would do at the meetings, who would call the meeting, or give me some idea of what?
Yeah, they had people in fact, people were all working on a deal, some were speakers, some weren't, But as far as fighting, they all could fight. I mean, they really fought for what they needed. I mean, when you go hungry, I could remember one time when I lived in North Detroit, and I sent my husband, I said, you go and get something to eat, because we had a little flour, so that worked. The one that worked at the welfare, she come over and try to make me show what I got. So I showed her the flour. I said, you want to eat that? You go ahead. And she And you know, the worst part of it is that the woman did a lot of fighting because they were protecting their men. I could remember Mary Gossman, that when she protected Chris Alston, that the police they didn't have these trim policemen. They had great big husky men, and they start shooting at Chris, and Chris was jumping the fence. Like I said, that he was just jumping up and down, and Mary grabbed that policeman, and he had to let go, stop shooting, because she really fought. And then Mary was a big, you know, as far as a fighter, she was. When you know, her book isn't lying a bit, because I've been reading it about 3 times and I keep forgetting what I read, so I go right back at it.
Great.
But she was that type of person. She just wouldn't take no for an answer. And you know, by her being Jewish, she you know, like when she was born in Ukraine.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt.
Yeah.
We're back. Hi, sorry about that.
all right.
If you could, you talked a little bit about your remembering your mother going out on street corners and going to the meetings. If you could just, I'm going to ask Jerry.
Yeah, we used to.
So if you
Still talk.
Well, right now they're asking me, and then they'll ask you.
So if you could tell me
Yeah.
something about what you remember.
Well, all right, what I remember when I was a kid, my mother being so much involved with the working people that we were on our own quite a bit when I was younger. And of course, being older, I was in charge of my brother, but that was a different story. The only thing I remember is that my mother was so always involved, rushing here or rushing there, and getting involved in block corners and street corners to make talks about getting organized to help each other. And that if, like when Stella said about families being evicted, when they heard about families being evicted, that's when they would really congregate and especially go from door to door, neighbor to neighbor, and ask them to come to this meeting so that then they can go to the house to try to protect these families or try to keep them from being evicted. In fact, a number of times they would take some of the furniture back in the house. I mean, I was at a couple of them standing on the side there because Mom would take me with her in a lot of places that she went to. And they would actually go ahead and take the furniture back in. And these guys would have to come and take them back out. It became a confrontation sometimes between the ones that, of course, were forced to take them out and the ones that were bringing them back in. And that she would try to get people to get some kind of help. There were, because she was involved with the Ukrainian club. And that's how she became, I guess, involved in the unemployed council, because they had to get to people that were already organized to try to get the movement to go to do things. And that's what she would always be involved with.
Let me interject. It's important when you're talking that you say my mother, because you're not going to know who she is.
Okay, my mother.
But this is all good about the Ukrainian club and the
It's a habit.
Yeah, I think I need some water.
Well, I don't know that too well.
Anna, I want to ask you about the Hunger March. What do you remember about that day in 1932, the Hunger March?
Hunger March? Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I was out there. Naturally, I was the so-called organizer of the Ukrainian groups. I've been all over, Muskegon, Lansing, and then making speeches. So I went to this march, I was there. And when I was there, I was stood and on the street when they marched, and Joe York was up on the kind of fence, and he called to me, Anna, they got me. and he put his hand on his chest. He showed me that he got old. I want to go to him, but the people that I was marching with him won't let me. Say, because if you go on the other side, you might be killed. We need you over here. So I didn't went to him personally. But Joe York was killed at that march. That was my story of the march, and I understood very well.
Thank you. Stella, you were at the march that day.
Yeah, but
What are your memories?
well, my memory is that people start running like crazy. And I didn't know what was happening, but I know one thing, that the tear gas, I didn't even realize they were shooting. You know, later on I knew about that, but right then. But then we used to have, you know, I told you about Bill Gates. That was Bill Gates that I told you that he hasn't eaten much, you know, that his mind went. His older brother, he was quite a bit older than him, he stood up and kept hollering at people, you know, to go forward. And the bullets were flying around. I didn't even know it, you know, and it was very windy. And while he was flying, he had bullet holes all over his coat, but didn't hit him. No, it didn't hit him, because, you know, we were even laughing about it later, you know, how lucky he was, you know.
Sorry, ran out of film.
But didn't hit him, you know,
That's
that is
amazing.
something. His name was Al Getz.
Yes, I read about him.
That was the last take on this
He's one of
role.
the leaders, right?
Yeah.
Last take on this role.
We're rolling.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, let's go back, Stella.
Show
let's
311,
go over
camera
again
roll
when you arrived at the
49.
Hunger March and just what you remember. Let's do that again.
Well, you know, I was running like everybody else, and there were children there too. But I can't seem to remember too much, because in the first place, my eyes were, you know, for about 2 days, I couldn't hardly see through them because it was watering too much.
From the tear gas.
But that's about all I could remember. I remember people, I don't know, I remember they even come to, after it was over, they even come to my mother's house, you know, some of them.
Well,
You
why
know,
don't I have you start again and say when you were at the Hunger March, that you told me before that you remembered people running around and the bullets flying and all
yeah,
that.
there were bullets were flying, but I didn't even notice that. You know, all I know that people were running around like crazy. They were, you know, I guess a lot of them didn't know what was happening. You know, that's something so funny. After it was all over, I remember a lot of, you know, there's people were crying and hollering, and I just didn't know what to think. I really couldn't figure out what was going on until afterwards.
That's why were they marching?
Why did you go to the Hunger March?
Well, I belonged to unemployed council, and we used to work with people that were on the welfare. And when they couldn't get their welfares, we used to go there and, you know, help them out. You know, that it was such a. It's hard to explain, you know. I mean, because people were all hungry then at that time. There's very few people who had jobs. You know, not only that, but I could tell you about my dad's friend. He worked in Forge for years. And then once he come over my father's and he says, Mike, he got himself drunk and he says, Mike, I love you. You know, they were buddies. And he says, and my dad didn't pay attention to him. And he went, then the bank closed and all the money he had was gone, beside no job. So he lived about, I think, on 52nd Street. He went home and he got a gun and shot himself. People were shooting themselves. They hung themselves, because they just couldn't go through all that. There's a lot of them that, like even this young guy, Billy Getz, he hung himself in an empty house,
What did you expect to accomplish that day? Did you have...
Well, unemployment or food, that's what people were fighting for food and unemployment and a place to live. There's a lot of people didn't have a place to live, just like they have now homeless right now. But, it's people don't understand that people have to eat and they have to sleep and they gotta have a place to get along on, because I go to Ford's Hospital here, and I see a sign where they carry a sign and they says, I'll work for food. Now, that's ridiculous. Why should we have enough food and we have enough, things that they could let people have? They have homes. They destroy.
I'm going to interrupt you now, just because that's the current, and we want
Yeah.
to stay in the past. And now I want to ask Anna, if I can, why did you march that day? Why did you go to the Hunger March? Why did you go to the Hunger March that day in 1932?
You asking me?
Yeah.
Oh, I was in a group of the people, progressive. So they organized that group to go up for march because we've been seeing so many people losing their homes, losing a lot of things that they have and no job. She said, no meals, nothing, no place to sleep. Well, that's why I went in that group to march.
Who organized your group?
I did. I was the chairman of the Ukrainians groups in the whole Michigan. And I was having the groups in Hamtramck, in East Detroit, in Dearborn, and all over. So I was a chairman, and I was in it. And that's what we organized, this group to go for march. The same thing, we organized a group that went to Washington to get at Social Security, to get the...
Okay, I'm going to interrupt you there because that's later on.
Yeah, that was later on, but I was in that group that
Can I
I was
interrupt here?
always in.
I think Mom is just, after all, she is older, but a lot of the people, like in our neighborhood, that worked at Ford's, they had jobs. The Lithuanian family, the Polish family, and there was another Polish family behind us. Now, they all worked at Ford's, and we knew what the trouble was that they were having. And in the Ukrainian club were a lot of the fellas that did work at Ford's. And this is where all this kind of, became more prevalent because of the fact that we organized this, but they became more involved because they were involved with Ford's. And they needed the jobs. They needed the families to support them. And we were having, because I remember my parents, even though my dad didn't work at Ford's because of his hand, they wouldn't hire him, and he got this poor job. We never did go on welfare. They were very proud. We never got on welfare. But I do remember they made sure we ate, even though my mom and dad maybe never ate. But they made sure we at least had bologna sandwich or something, and Mom used to cook a lot of soup, which of course was the mainstay of our, food for our family. And therefore, they took so much to heart because it involved people that we knew, that she knew, and I knew as a kid. The kids that it involved them. Like this poor family of 10, I mean, I'll never forget that family because they really went through an awful lot. I mean, their clothes were not like as good as my clothes, even though, thank goodness, my mother could sew. And like she said, this mother of this Ford worker was not educated. She had very little education, and yet all these children, well, it was hard to supply for them. So therefore, it took to heart. And like I say, my mom was very much involved with people all the time, knowing, or hearing anything in the neighborhood, blocks away that she would hear or find somebody was being evicted, and they would go and try to do something to prevent that. And I think that's why all this, was so much in her, and this being of the Ukrainians and being such a involved person, that's how they got involved in that Ford Hunger March. And it was, no, I was just going on 13 and I was not involved. The only thing I remember, as I say, when Mom came home, she was very much with, her eyes were red and teary-eyed and all this she had gone through. And of course, the only thing I remember then is going with her to the hall where the bodies were laid out to go to that funeral. I'll never forget, because at my age, to see so many people, I just thought the whole world was there, because there were so many people at the funeral that when you walk down the street, it was just jam-packed. Now, I remember that very vividly.
Tell me more about what you remember about the funeral.
Well, like I say, I remember going up the steps in this hall and seeing the men that were laid out. For some reason or other, maybe because Mom had mentioned about Joe York being shot, I remember seeing him in the casket. He was quite a tall fella, and he had kind of a light brown hair, and he was not very heavy. He was kind of slender. And I remember him the most. Now, I remember Ann Lenny's brother, because he was chunkier. And I do remember him, and I was always a chunky, so I remember him being on the chunkier side, dark hair, and I can see that in my mind. The other two, I don't really remember, but those for some other stayed in my mind. And I do remember, like I say, the
Excuse me a second.
Just about to run out of film.
Okay, I wanted to ask you what your memories are of the funeral.
Well, I'll tell you that the funeral, I stood guard there. Most of us did. I guess I don't remember how long, an hour or whatever it is, and they used to change. And when Curtis died, Curtis Williams, I didn't know Curtis, but I knew his brother. Well, I did see him when he was dead, that they had guards, the guards for him.
Right, at the first funeral, though, the big funeral march.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, we, from Ferry Hall, we marched to Grand Circus Park, and from there, if I remember correctly, they had the bodies moved to Woodmere Cemetery, and with so many cars going, but I understand, I didn't go, but they wouldn't let everybody in the cemetery. And I could remember that much, they wouldn't let everybody, they just let few cars go, and the rest, they closed the gates on them. They have these big iron gates.
Okay, thank you. Anna, I wanted to ask you if you would
Real loud.
If you would repeat the story to me about when you were at the Hunger March and you saw Joe York get shot. Could you tell me that story again?
I was stood in the, what is that street?
Miller Road.
Miller Road.
Yeah, Miller Road. That we marched to it. And he was on the other side that went over the gate to the fort. And he was up on a fence. and he see me. I was on the Miller Road, and he yelled to me, Anna, Anna, they got me. And he put his hand on his chest, and he said they got him. So afterwards, I want to go to him, but people that I was marching with, they won't let me go because said, if you go over there on the other side, they may kill you. We don't want to lose you yet. So I didn't go to him. But I see him there very well, and he was howling, Anna, they got me. That was all I could tell you. And the others, the same thing was noticed me over there from that group, and they also say, Anna, we are here. So that was all I could remember. Maybe if this been done 10 years ago, I will remember more, but since now
That's great, though, really,
great.
really.
it's 97 years old, my memory is not there like used to
No,
been.
it's great, though. Jerry, I wanted to ask,
I want to say it, we have so many people, we have a two-builded homes, Ukrainian on the Martin and the Yad and the Oakman Boulevard in Dearborn. We've been having a lot of people. Today, we haven't got hardly nothing, just American-born youngster like she is, but happened that she married Ukrainian guy, so she kept on. And the other, they marry a different nationality.
Let me remind Jerry, when you're talking, it's important that you
Look over at Leslie.
and I'll later.
Okay.
Okay. I wanted to ask you, you mentioned on the phone when we talked to you before that your mother took you to meetings. And I was wondering if you could tell me what you remember about that.
About the meetings?
Well, about going, tell me. that,
No,
you know,
going.
mother-
Well, like Mom, as you have heard, being very active and being in charge of this area from the Ukrainian club, very much left with us every time she went somewhere. Most of the time, we were with her. As Stella had said, she remembers dragging the two kids, because I have a younger brother, and therefore we were always involved. It was not easy sometimes for a kid, because I was always athletic. Even today at 73, I'm still playing volleyball and softball. So it was not easy for me to be going to a meeting all the time and listening to a lot of discussion. But I do think that that had a big impact on me, especially as I got older. I began to appreciate more all the things that she had gone through and the benefits that we have gotten from people like her and Stella and, you know, others in that age bracket
What do you
of what they
remember
did.
about the meetings?
Well, the thing I remember about meetings is, you know, people getting up and talking about, you know, the problems that they were facing at that particular time. You know, because sometimes they were talking about not only the Ukrainian culture to, you know, get that, but they were also talking about the problems that they needed to get jobs, they needed to support each other. So these are the kind of things I remember as a child, listening to them talk, that they have to be well organized in order to get any benefits. And that's what the main part was, for them to be organized so that they can get benefits. Because that's how she felt that you could only get things done, is if you had people with you, behind you. Individually, it was hard to do anything. So that was her main goal.
Can I interrupt? Can we have you say that once more, and instead of saying she, say my mother understood that you had to be organized, and be sure to look over at Leslie, okay?
All right, I remember going to meetings with my mother, who was very active in the Ukrainian organization because she was in charge of this area. And my mother always was involved in meetings whereby there was problems. A lot of it had to do with the heritage of the Ukrainian people, the culture, And yet at the same time, everybody had some problem because of the fact that they didn't have the education, they didn't know the language that well, so they had to be more organized in order to be able to get anything. And that was the theme that I remember my mother always saying, if we want to get anything and to be able to get some things done, that we've got to be together to do this. Otherwise, we're not going to get anything done singly. It has to be showing the people that we are organized and that we mean to get better conditions for our people. And that was the gist of a lot of the meetings that she went to, because not only the Ukrainian Club, but of course the Unemployed Council. And that's where they got a lot of the understanding from the Unemployed Council as to what was going on all over the city, because her being involved with the Ukrainians, and then other groups that were involved, the Lithuanians, the Italians, the Russians, every group, Romanians, all had their own organizations. And going to the Unemployed Council, they learned from each other. And my mother was involved very much in this because of learning to be with the other organizations, the other groups. That's how they become so involved. That's how I think my mother became so involved in the Hunger March, because these people had the same problems. So they all decided to do something about it.
Great.
Great.
Sorry,
That's what this
that was
movie's all
great.
about.
Okay, thank you.
Great.
Isn't that nice to have somebody to remember me?
Yes.
Yes.
She knows that she was left all alone in the house, and don't you dare touch that or don't touch this. Just be a
Many
child.
times I felt a little bit neglected, that's true.
And returning.
Okay, so,
I wanted to ask you, Stella, about the communist movement in Detroit at that time. Did you know about it? Were you aware of it? Or
Yeah, I belong to the YCL.
could you tell me what that is?
That's a Young Communist League.
Let's ever start, I belong to the Young
Could
Communist.
I have you
Yeah.
start again and say at that time, and
Yeah.
you can tell me what years even if you'd like.
Well, I was about 18 years old. But, you know, one thing,
Well, let me stop you. Just say, I was 18 years old and I was a member of the Young Communist League,
Yeah.
and then go on from there.
well, we used to help, we used to have especially when I lived on the west side, there was a great big group. I think it took practically a whole auditorium. That's how much young people we have organized there. And they were, you know, most of them were at the Ford Hunger March at the time. But one thing I want to tell you, that women used to play big parts in it, young and old, for one reason, that they used to attack men more than they did the women, and the women used to defend the men. They used to do dirty tricks on some of these police, and I mean, the policemen were more afraid of a woman they were a man, because they would beat up on the man where they had to think twice before they touch a woman. And I mean that the women were very vicious about that. I could remember one time we went to the welfare in North Detroit, and the guy spoke up, you know, about food. And when he got through, you know, the police started chasing him. So the woman got him and got him away from there somehow. Nobody knows how. So this is what makes me laugh now. The guy, they said, the police says, which way did he go? Which way did he go? And you know, the apple man said that way. And he was selling apple at the corner. They have Alaska's furniture now, but that used to be a show there. And when he did that, those apples were flying all over the street. These women really got them. They really got him.
And we're gonna
Pretend that Anna has not told us anything.
Well, we're
I'm
going to
sorry.
start with
I guess
Stella.
we didn't pretend that
And
Stella
I'm
was not
going to ask you, Stella, to please tell me that, when you were 18 years old, you joined the Young Communist League. So if you could say that for me, so that
Yeah.
they'll hear that on the film.
Yeah, when I was 18, I joined Young Communist League. And then I worked with the Unemployed Council. And with me, I've been all over, like, I'd work with East Side and West Side. That's how I happen to know people.
Why did you...
No, my
oh,
battery
sorry.
just ran
Oh.
out.
We're speeding too.
10:48.
Could you tell me again, when I was 18, I joined the Young Communist League, and then could you tell me why? But start with when I was 18.
Yeah, when I was 18, well, I used to listen to my parents, especially my mother. She was very, a person that she always talked about Europe, how tough it was, and, how they all come here to better themselves, I know my father come first, and 6 months later we settle in New Jersey, Bridgeton, New Jersey, and then we moved to Violin. It's just like from here to Dearborn, that's how far it was, those little towns. And then when my father died, we moved to Detroit. So she kept telling me about life itself, because she went through a lot of hell, and well, I guess it was more from my mother that my mother used to tell me, and she was a type that she couldn't stand people suffering. So, and she even told me about how she had to live in Europe, and how we have to try to do a little better than what we did over there.
Well, how did you hear about
Hang on
the...
a second, I'm gonna...
To join some young groups.
Well, wait till I get your
Oh.
camera.
Okay. What were the Young Communists doing at that time?
Well, at that time they were doing the unemployment work, they were even putting people in homes and things.
I'm sorry, could I interrupt you and ask you to start again, and could you say that at that time the Communist Party was? So we don't know who they is, so they'll hear that on the film.
Oh, the communist.
Yes, so if you can include
Well,
that.
they were working people, They really were, it meant like an organization that you get together and you discuss, you help other people to, get on the welfare. We did an awful lot. And then see that they're secured at their homes. If they're thrown out, to make sure that the welfare got the people to a home, and that they had something to eat. It was, it's just the suffering of the people. They come here from different parts, different countries, and they were suffering just as bad. That some had little jobs, and like if they got laid off, the banks closed up. All the banks were closed, and the people lost whatever, they had their savings. European people are very funny. They try to save for, like, say, tomorrow, and there's no tomorrow.
What? Sir? PP that her mother explained the
Could
revolution.
you just say to me again, my mother explained the Russian Revolution to me, what you just said?
Yeah, well, she explained to me.
Let me stop you. I need you to say, my mother said,
Oh.
okay.
No.
Okay, yeah.
Well, my mother, she told me about the revolution in Russia, and I was a kid at the time when the revolution was in Russia. And my mother explained why people fought over there to better themselves because people were, they didn't have anything. They had little lands, and that's what they had to live. And when they had to sell their eggs to get a few pennies out of it, you know.
Right. Good, great, thank you.
Yeah.
Jerry, I wanted to ask you if you could repeat the story that we talked about earlier about your neighborhood and how you had lots of different people. There were Russians and Ukrainians. And if you could tell me that story again about when you first came to Detroit.
Well, I remember, of course, first, as my mother said, coming from New York, we did live in Detroit. And I do remember going to school in Detroit, and this was a very integrated, with blacks as well as all the other nationalities. But then we moved, when I was 7 years old, we moved to Dearborn. And we had an integrated neighborhood. We had the Poles, we had the Lithuanians, we had the Finnish, we had the Scottish, we had the Italians, and the Romanians in the
No
family.
blacks.
So, but there
Please.
were no blacks because at that time we didn't realize that Dearborn was not, open to the blacks. And
Okay, excuse me one moment. I'm going to start over just the listing the...
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I'm sorry. Could you start again by just saying in the Dearborn neighborhood we had, and go
Yeah.
ahead and list everyone.
Well, when we moved to Dearborn, then we became into a neighborhood of poor people, but they were all of different nationalities. We had lots of the Polish people there, we had the Lithuanians, we had the Finnish, we had Scottish, we had Italians, and we had Romanians. So we were a family. I do remember all of us children, we had a great time. We didn't have a lot. We had a tin can to play with, or we played tag, or as my mother, when we were starting to go to school and during the summer vacations, my mother had open house. We had school every morning in our house during the summertime to keep us occupied. So it was really amazing when I think back about that for my mother. In fact, it was the principal at that school sent her a thank you card because these children were doing quite well because they were already able to be with
Okay,
What is
Jerry,
that?
That just lets us know so we can sync the sound with the phone.
Oh,
We want to start with Jerry, and I want to ask you, during that time period, near the Hunger March and all of that, what were your fears then? Do you have any, and remind us that you were a little girl, and to say, when I was a little girl, what were your fears?
Well, when I was a little girl, at the time of the, in the 1930s, things were getting a little bit tough for the families that were in our neighborhood. We did happen to be the poorer section because they call that the East Dearborn area, which was the poorer section. And being, going on 13 and that, I relied on my mother a lot for things. And of course, with her being involved, I got to know a little bit more about the fact of how everybody was having a rough time making their house payments, keeping up and getting enough food for their family. I felt that my parents were doing very well considering the circumstances. Like I said, they were hungry sometimes and made sure that we ate. I was just afraid, I think, more for my mother because of her being such an active lady and, learning more after the march. I think that came to my mind more that we were lucky that nothing happened to her. I'm not realizing at the time how, nobody, I guess, knew what was going to be at the Hunger March, how it was going to turn out. It was just going to be a parade to put in demands of wanting, certain things, unemployment and benefits for the people. And to turn out that way was, after you learn about it, it was really scary for realizing that I could not have had a mother. She could have been one of those that was killed.
Great. Do you want to go to Anna or Stella? Let's go to Stella. Stella, could you tell me around the Hunger March time in the early 30s, what fears did you have?
I have no fears. I was always that way. I never feared things. I got in the fight, and I seemed to fight it out. That's about it. When I was even a kid, I don't know why, but that's the kind of person I am.
Great.
I don't know why. I still don't have fears. You know, like get scared about something.
Doesn't happen. Great, thank you. Anna, I want to ask you, around the time of the Hunger March in the early 30s, did you have any fears for yourself or your family?
Well, no, at first I guess I was too young yet to worry about it. But I know that we have to do fighting for the benefit, for the better life. I see the people didn't have no homes, they didn't have nothing to eat. I used to go and ask them, what can I do to help? I never been unemployed. I work in the laundry, in the railroad station, wherever I could get a job, I was taking.
Camera's turning. Give me 1 second here.
All lights are on. Yes. I'm ready.
Oh,
Anytime.
okay. If you could go through and say, we lived in Dearborn and, you know, the neighborhood, list the neighborhood, and then at the end say, but there were no blacks or Jews.
When mother and, of course, my father and my younger brother, when we moved to Dearborn, I was just 7 years old at that time and going to grade school. We lived in this integrated area with the Poles, the Lithuanians, the Romanians, the Finnish, Scotch, and Italians. And going to school, I will say that we were of the lower level as far as the poverty goes, but we all managed to live together. Going to school, I do not remember there ever being a black in my class or even a Jewish person in my class. It was mostly all Slavics and very few Finnish, but Lithuanians and Poles and some Russian. That is what I remember going to school with. We did not have a complete integration. We were without the blacks to grow up, to understand, and without any of the Jewish people in our school.
Great.
That's it. Good.
That's it.
Wonderful.
All done. You guys.
This will be room tone for interviews on camera roll 47 through 52. Thank you.
Great.